Imagine working for years in silence, scrubbing floors, folding sheets, and fading into the background while carrying a mind full of ideas and a heart that still dreams. That was Clara Benson's life. A hotel maid by day, a caregiver by night, no degree, no title. No one ever asked her what she could become. Until one morning, she greeted a CEO not with words, but with sign language, and everything changed. But when the door to possibility opened, another slammed shut. What would you do if stepping forward meant risking everything that kept your world together? Would you choose safety or dare to believe you were meant for more? This is a story about quiet courage, second chances, and the unseen strength it takes to rebuild a voice no one thought you had. So take a breath, let your heart slow down, and let's begin with a woman the world overlooked, until she chose not to overlook herself. If this story touches something in you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There's someone out there who needs to hear this too. Clara Benson had learned how to move without being seen. She knew which doors creaked just slightly and how to close them with the silence of a sigh. Her sneakers, white with graying soles, glided down the hotel's pristine corridors like they were part of the carpet. Her uniform was crisp, her name tag polished, but her eyes rarely met anyone else's. Not because she didn't want to be seen, but because she'd spent years understanding what it meant to be invisible. The Green Hill Inn stood proudly at the edge of a small Vermont town, its brick walls warmed by years of sun and snowfall. Clara had worked there for almost 5 years, pushing the same cart every morning past 600 m, cleaning after people whose shoes cost more than her monthly rent. The place was elegant, but it wasn't home, not to her, not anymore. She started on the 3rd floor each day, where the long-stay guests usually were. People who came in for retreats, business, or to just get away from their real lives. Clara never asked questions. She just made sure their coffee makers were clean and their sheets were tucked sharp. It was easier that way. No small talk, no disappointments. But there was something different about Clara. Something soft and steady that lived in the way she folded towels or paused when someone passed her in the hallway, offering them a faint smile. There was a quiet dignity in how she moved, how she held herself like someone who had once lived a bigger life and chose to carry it silently. Most days, she didn't speak much, not out of shyness, exactly. It was more restraint. Clara believed words should mean something. That silence, when used kindly, could speak volumes. In the staff break room, people sometimes wondered about her. Nice enough, one said. Sweet, but keeps to herself, said another. No one really knew her story, and maybe that's how she preferred it. When the guests were still asleep or out at breakfast, Clara had a small ritual. Between rooms, she'd sometimes pause in the empty hallway, lift her hands gently, and begin to sign, not for anyone else, just for herself. Her fingers moved fluently, forming words she never said aloud. Light. Remember. Try. It wasn't just muscle memory. It was longing, a kind of quiet rebellion against everything she had given up. A lifetime ago, or maybe just 6 years, Clara had studied American Sign Language and taught it part-time at a small community school. She had a gift for it. Her hands moved with such grace, students said watching her felt like watching poetry. But when her father passed away suddenly and her younger brother Eli lost his hearing in a swimming accident, Clara had to become something else. Not a teacher, not a dreamer, just a provider. She left college without finishing her degree, took the first job she could find, moved into a smaller apartment with her mom and Eli. There were no protest speeches, no journal entries about injustice, just grocery lists and rent receipts, and nights spent Googling how to fix a leaking sink with duct tape. Some choices are not heroic. They're just necessary. Still, each night, Clara would sit beside Eli, hands dancing in the air as they talked about everything from homework to why pizza should never have pineapple on it. Their bond didn't need sound. It never had. The hotel, in its own way, had become a kind of rhythm. Clean, fold, replace, move on. And for the most part, Clara didn't mind. There was safety in repetition, in not being asked to do more than what was expected. People didn't look at housekeepers for their opinions. They didn't ask about your past, and that anonymity felt protective until the morning he arrived. Room 407, executive suite, reserved under the name Nathan Cole. Clara had seen the name on her roster and recognized it from a recent headline, Tech Visionary Expands Hearing Access Initiative to Rural Communities. She'd read the article twice. Nathan Cole wasn't just a wealthy man. He was known for developing one of the most advanced real-time sign language translation devices in the country. His company had made major strides in assistive tech, but what struck Clara wasn't the innovation. It was how he talked about empathy, inclusion, and the need to build with people, not just for them. Still, names like that usually stayed out of sight. Important men like Nathan didn't notice maids, and yet, that morning something felt different. As she approached room 407, her cart squeaking slightly over the hall's tile seam, she paused. The door was cracked open, just slightly, enough to hear. Nothing. Just the quiet breeze from the balcony. She knocked gently. Housekeeping, no response. Another knock. Still silence. Following protocol, Clara pushed the door open slowly. The room was mostly untouched. A laptop sat open on the desk, a cup of coffee going cold nearby. She moved cautiously, until her eyes caught the silhouette by the balcony. Nathan Cole stood there, back turned, hands gripping the railing, unmoving. He wasn't just looking at the view, he was lost in it, frozen, like someone trying to hear something in silence. Then he did something strange. He lifted his right hand, slowly, haltingly, and began to sign. It was rough, clumsy, unpracticed, but unmistakable. Help. Clara stopped mid-step. She didn't think. She just moved. Gently. She tapped the glass door between them. Nathan turned, startled. Their eyes met. For a second, it felt like the world had forgotten to breathe. Clara, standing on the inside, lifted her hands. Signed clearly. Good morning. You are not alone. The change in his face was immediate. Not shock, not confusion. Something deeper. Something like my recognition. The moment passed, but it didn't vanish. Nathan Cole didn't say anything after Clara signed to him. He didn't smile, didn't wave her in. He just gave the smallest of nods, slow, deliberate, then turned back to the skyline as if unsure what had just happened. Clara closed the door gently and backed away, her heart thudding, not from fear but from something stranger recognition. Not that he had recognized her, but that somehow, somewhere beneath the layers of corporate armor, he had been reached. She went back to her cart, picked up her linen checklist, and tried to focus on the next room, but her fingers were shaking slightly, betraying the storm inside. What had that moment meant by the time her shift ended? Clara felt like a kettle that had simmered all day without boiling. She moved through her tasks, but something deeper stirred beneath the surface. It wasn't just about Nathan Cole. It was about being seen. About letting something sacred slip out of her hands again, even if just for a second. That night, she sat at the kitchen table with Eli. The house was small, the walls thin, and the fridge hummed like an old radio stuck between stations. But it was home, warm in the ways that counted. Eli was doing his homework algebra, maybe physics, his brow furrowed in focus. At 16, he had grown tall, his frame lanky but strong. His hearing loss hadn't dimmed his spirit. If anything, it had sharpened his humor and resilience. Clara placed a cup of tea in front of him. He looked up, smiled, and signed. Thanks. You okay? She hesitated, then signed back. Something strange happened at work. Strange bad or strange good? I'm not sure yet. She told him. Not everything, but enough. Enough to make Eli raise his eyebrows and sign slowly. Nathan Cole. Seriously, the tech guy. Clara nodded. He signed help. Really? Yes, it was clumsy, but it was sign language. And it felt real. Eli looked at her for a long time, then simply said, Maybe he needed you more than you think. Later. After Eli went to bed, Clara stayed at the table, She traced the rim of her mug, her mind replaying old memories like film reels flickering in reverse. There was a time before the hotel, before the debt, before the exhaustion when she had loved teaching. ASL wasn't just a subject. It was a bridge between people, between silence and connection. Her students came from all walks of life, parents of deaf children, teens exploring language, even older adults wanting to reconnect with long-lost family. And Clara. She had felt alive in those classrooms, her hands moving, her expressions animated, her students' faces lighting up when understanding clicked into place. But life, as it often does, had different plans. When Eli's accident happened, Clara had just entered her senior year of college. She was working part-time, juggling classes and late shifts at a bookstore. Then came the call Eli had been pulled from the lake unconscious. The doctors weren't sure if he'd ever hear again. Their mother unraveled slowly after that. Panic attacks, medical bills, guilt wrapped in silence. Clara didn't think twice. She dropped out, applied for any job that paid weekly, and built her life around holding her family together. She didn't regret it, but she missed the part of herself that had gone quiet ever since. The next day at work felt off, not in a bad way, just tilted, like the hallway had shifted half a degree. People greeted her the same. Maggie Green, her supervisor, handed out room assignments with her usual clipped efficiency. But Clara noticed the change when she got to the 4th floor again. There were 2 security guards near the elevator. They weren't unusual. Green Hill Inn hosted government officials from time to time, but one of them nodded toward Clara as she passed, like he knew something. She reached room 407, just as a tall assistant stepped out with a clipboard. "Miss Benson?" he asked. Glancing at her badge, Clara blinked. "Yes, you've been requested upstairs, executive level. Mr. Cole wants to see you." Clara stood frozen for a moment. No one from housekeeping ever went to the executive floor unless something went very wrong. She followed the assistant into the private elevator. Her heart pounded with every floor they climbed, 5, 6, 7, all the way to 10. The executive level was quiet, carpeted like a library, with art on the walls that probably cost more than her car. A woman at the front desk smiled and gestured toward a glass-walled office at the far end. The name etched in silver read Nathan Cole, founder and CEO. The door was already open. Nathan looked up from behind his desk when she stepped in. He wasn't dressed like the photos online, no tie, no designer blazer, just a collared shirt, sleeves rolled up, glasses perched low on his nose. "Clara." "Right," he said. She nodded, standing awkwardly. He gestured to a seat. "Would you sit with me for a moment?" Clara sat on the very edge of the chair, knees tight together, hands folded in her lap. Nathan looked at her carefully, not like a man scanning a résumé, but like someone trying to piece together a puzzle made of silence. "I wanted to thank you for yesterday," he said after a pause. Clara opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. So she signed instead. "I wasn't sure you'd noticed." "I did," he replied softly. "More than you know." He leaned back. "I've been working with my team on an AI-based sign language interpreter. It's functional, but it lacks soul, context, emotion. And I saw something in the way you signed, something I can't get from textbooks or code." Clara tilted her head, cautious. "Are you asking something of me I'm asking?" Nathan said. "If you'd be willing to consult, just part-time, help us understand what we're missing." Silence stretched between them. Then Clara signed, slowly. "I'm not qualified anymore. I left that life behind." Nathan smiled. "Maybe, or maybe it's still part of you. Waiting." Clara didn't remember walking back to the service elevator. She only remembered how her hands had trembled. It wasn't fear, not quite. It was the weight of a question that had no shape yet. By the time she reached the housekeeping break room, her cart was still parked in the same spot. A neatly folded stack of hand towels on top. The clink of coffee cups and casual chatter filled the space. But Clara felt like a ghost floating through it all. "Hey, you okay?" one of the younger housekeepers asked. Clara nodded. "Just tired." She didn't mention the elevator ride, or the CEO, or how, for the first time in years, someone had asked her to be more than what her job title suggested, because she wasn't sure if it had really happened. That night, Clara sat on her porch, wrapped in her favorite flannel coat, the late autumn breeze curling around her like fingers. Eli joined her with 2 mugs of cocoa, one for each hand, balanced with practiced precision. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Eli eventually signed, "You're quiet." Clara smiled, then signed back. "He asked me to help with something real, big." Eli tilted his head. "The CEO guy." "Yes. He said he needs help designing their ASL software interface. Not just technically, human-centered. He said I had perspective." Eli sipped his cocoa, then signed, "So, what's stopping you?" Clara's fingers hesitated. "I'm not that person anymore. You still talk to me every day. That's different." "Is it?" He reached across and gently tapped her wrist. "You didn't forget how. You just stopped believing it mattered." Clara looked at him, her little brother who had grown up too fast, because she had needed him to. Maybe he was right. The next morning, Clara was assigned to the West Wing room 512 among them. When she saw the number, something in her chest fluttered. She tried to ignore it. Room 512 was a corner suite, spacious, modern, all clean lines and muted grays. Nathan Cole wasn't inside this time, but the signs of him were everywhere. Post-it notes scribbled in technical shorthand, a whiteboard with a flow diagram, and on the coffee table, a prototype tablet labeled Project Holloway. Clara didn't touch anything, but her eyes caught the notes, emotion mapping inconsistent, particularly in fluid gestures, missing cultural context in conversational ASL versus academic signs, need human calibration. Those words tugged at her in an almost physical way. She had taught those differences. She had lived them. Just then, the door clicked. Nathan stepped in, balancing a phone between shoulder and ear. He paused when he saw her, lowered the phone, and offered a small smile. "Didn't expect to see you here today. I was assigned to this wing." He nodded, glanced at the tablet on the table, then back at her. "I meant what I said yesterday, Clara." She looked at him steadily. "So did I. I'm not sure I belong in a room like this." He didn't flinch, just crossed the room, took a pen from the counter, and wrote on the whiteboard in large letters, "Who decides where we belong?" Clara stared at the words. She'd spent so many years assuming her place was behind the scenes, making beds, folding towels, speaking only when spoken to. But maybe that wasn't the whole story. Nathan spoke gently. "We're developing software that could help millions communicate more freely, but we're missing something. No matter how smart the code is, it doesn't feel right." He paused. "We need someone who doesn't just know ASL. We need someone who understands it." Clara folded a corner of the fresh sheet she had just laid down. "Even if I said yes, what would you expect of me?" Nathan didn't blink. "Come by the lab next week. Meet the team. Share what you see. I don't need a resume. I need your eyes, your instincts, and your honesty." She looked at him then, really looked. There was something worn in his face, like someone who had built something magnificent but forgotten why he started. That weariness. She knew it too well. On Friday, Clara sat in the park near their small apartment. Eli was skateboarding on the pavement loop nearby. She watched him loop around again and again, wind in his hair, confidence in his step. She remembered teaching him signs for wind, fast, danger. He had learned quickly, not because he had to, but because she made it feel like a game, a story. That's what language was, after all, a story written with the body, a way to say, "I see you," when no one else does. She pulled out her phone, scanned through missed calls, no new ones. Her fingers hovered over Nathan's contact. Then she typed a message. "I'll come in next Tuesday. Just to observe, nothing more, Clara." Seconds later, the reply blinked back. "That's all I ask. Thank you." She sat back, phone in her lap, heart steadier than it had been in weeks. She wasn't saying yes to the job, not yet, but maybe she was saying yes, to herself. The lab wasn't what Clara had expected. There were no shiny glass walls, no tech geniuses pacing in blazers, no glowing gadgets spinning in the air like something out of a sci-fi film. Instead, the workspace sat on the third floor of a converted mill just outside town. Red brick on the outside, creaky floors inside, old factory windows let in rivers of natural light, and long tables were cluttered with tools, monitors, wires, and stacks of empty coffee mugs. It smelled faintly of soldering iron and cinnamon granola. When Clara stepped in, clutching a borrowed tablet and wearing a simple navy cardigan, the room hushed, not rudely, not with suspicion, but like a gentle intake of breath, as if someone had opened a door none of them expected. Nathan came out from the far corner, sleeves rolled up again, his hair a little messier than last time. "You came," he said. Clara nodded, just to observe. He smiled. "Still counts." He introduced her to the core team Jonas, the lead developer mid-40s, wiry, quick-witted, and skeptical. Maya, a linguist who specialized in computational grammar, soft-spoken but sharp. And Ray, the UX designer, a young black woman with bold glasses and the kind of calm that came from surviving startups before. Clara didn't try to impress them. She simply watched. They were working on the Holloway prototype that morning, testing recognition software for conversational ASL. A young deaf woman named Tina had been invited to sign various phrases while the software attempted real-time interpretation. It worked, sort of, but something was off. The signs were technically correct, but the translation felt stiff, robotic. It missed context, missed expression. It flattened meaning. At one point, Tina signed a sentence, and the monitor output read, "I am annoyed by dinner." Clara frowned. She actually signed, "I'm over this conversation." "That's not about food." Jonas glanced at her. "That's what the model gave us, because the model is treating every sign as a word," Clara said, "not as part of a full-body language." She stepped forward carefully, not wanting to overstep. In ASL, facial expression isn't decoration, it's grammar, it's tone. You're missing the eyebrows, the cheek tension. That sign only means annoyed when paired with a different mouth movement. Jonas raised an eyebrow. Maya leaned forward. Nathan said nothing. Finally, Maya broke the silence. "Can you show us?" Clara turned to Tina and signed with ease, replaying the same sentence, but this time layering in the subtle shoulder shift, the dry smirk, the raised brow that made the meaning unmistakable. Tina laughed. "That's exactly what I meant." She signed. Nathan looked around the room. "That's what we've been missing." Clara left that day with a second invitation. Not a job, not yet, but a request to come back. To teach them not just to improve the tech, but to remind them what it was for. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. The cracks in the plaster looked like rivers running nowhere. She thought about how many years she had spent being quiet, making herself small, choosing safety over possibility. She didn't regret taking care of her family, but a small, stubborn part of her whispered, "You don't have to disappear just to survive." The next week, Clara returned to the lab twice, then 3 times. She wasn't being paid yet, but she didn't care. She stayed after hours with Maya discussing idiomatic signs. She sketched interface layouts with Ray, suggested emotional color coding for better mood detection. Even Jonas, who barely blinked during their first meeting, began asking her questions with genuine curiosity. Nathan, meanwhile, watched all of this unfold from a short distance. He rarely interrupted, just listened. And when Clara spoke, really spoke, he always heard her. But not everyone was pleased. Back at the Green Hill Inn, whispers started to ripple. One morning, Clara arrived early to stock linens and found her name missing from the new shift schedule. She approached Maggie Green behind the front desk. Maggie didn't look up from her clipboard. "Morning. Ms. Green, I noticed I'm not on the list today." Maggie clicked her pen. "That's because I reassigned you. Figured with all your new extracurriculars, we'd give you lighter duties." "Restroom detail and supply closet reorganization?" Clara blinked. "I haven't been late. I haven't missed a shift. No, Maggie said coolly. But let's be honest. Clara, your attention's been elsewhere. There was no accusation in her voice, but there was something colder, a wall, a boundary. Maggie continued, You've always been reliable, the kind of staff we count on. But people like him, she didn't name Nathan, they don't stick around. When they go, we're the ones left behind to clean up. Clara swallowed. Are you saying I should stop going? I'm saying, Maggie said, finally looking up, don't get ideas about where you belong. That night, Clara stood at the sink, scrubbing a pan while Eli dried dishes beside her. The water ran warm, but her thoughts churned cold. She signed, What if I'm just pretending to be something I'm not? Eli didn't answer immediately. He set the towel down, then signed slowly. You're not pretending. You're remembering. Clara blinked. What if they realize I'm not good enough? What if they realize you are... He tapped her shoulder, like he did when they were kids and he needed her attention. You don't have to be fearless, just willing. Clara laughed, quiet, tired, real. Then signed. Okay, I'll go back. Clara didn't expect to find her old self again, certainly not here, in a tech lab that smelled like coffee and solder, surrounded by people who had never scrubbed a toilet or clipped lint from a hotel comforter. And yet, something inside her had started to shift. She moved differently now, not louder, not faster, but with purpose. Her shoulders sat just a little higher. Her eyes didn't flinch when someone addressed her directly. It wasn't confidence exactly, but a distant cousin of it, one she hadn't seen in years. At the Green Hill Inn, however, that change didn't go unnoticed. One Thursday morning, as Clara loaded a fresh stack of towels into her cart, she felt a presence behind her. Maggie Green. Front desk wants to see you, Maggie said. Clara wiped her hands on her apron. Is there a problem? Didn't say, but you might want to. Think about how you're balancing things lately. The tone wasn't angry. It was cooler than that. Polite frost. Clara nodded, already feeling the tightening in her chest. She found the assistant manager waiting by the reception desk. He handed her a sealed envelope. Clara opened it carefully. Inside was a printed note, formal, impersonal, informing her that her schedule would be reduced to part-time hours in light of increased extracurricular obligations that may interfere with hotel duties. She stared at the words, part-time, no explanation, no discussion, just reclassification. Is this because of the lab work, she asked quietly. The assistant manager shifted uncomfortably. I'm just the messenger. Clara stood frozen for a beat too long, then folded the letter and slipped it into her pocket. She walked back to the linen room in silence, every step feeling heavier. That night, she didn't speak much at dinner. Eli noticed. Something happened. He signed. She hesitated. They cut my hours. Eli's brows pulled together. Why? Because I'm splitting time. Because they think I'm distracted. He tapped her wrist gently. You've given them 5 years. Never once late. Never once sick. I'm replaceable. Eli. He shook his head. No, you're just underestimated. Clara looked down at her chipped mug, fingers tracing the ceramic edge. Her voice, when it came, was low. I don't know if I belong in that lab. I didn't finish school. I'm not a software engineer. Half the time I have to Google the words they're using. Eli signed slowly. Do they ask you to come back? She nodded. Do they listen when you speak? She nodded again. Then maybe you're not there to know everything. Maybe you're there to teach them something they can't Google. The next Tuesday. Clara returned to the lab with a heavy heart and a heavier bag. She didn't mention the hotel, but Nathan noticed the change in her face immediately. He waited until lunch break to ask. Something happened. Clara shrugged. Not worth talking about. He paused. If it affects your time here, it matters to me. She hesitated, then finally said, They cut my hours. At the hotel. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. Because of this, Clara nodded. He set his coffee down. That's not okay. She smiled faintly. It's not illegal. Doesn't mean it's not wrong. For a moment, Clara expected him to offer her a job, to swoop in with a rescue. But he didn't. Instead, he asked, "What do you want?" The question landed harder than she expected. She didn't answer right away, because for so long, what she wanted hadn't mattered. Survival wasn't about preference. It was about practicality, about bills, medicine, rent. Her dreams had been put away like summer clothes in winter, folded, stored, forgotten. Now, someone was holding them back out. Later that afternoon, the team gathered for a feedback session on a new user interface. Clara was invited to sit in. They watched a test video of the software interpreting a deaf mother signing to her hearing child. The recognition engine captured the main ideas, but missed the warmth, the humor, the soul. Clara raised her hand. When a parent signs to a child, it's not just language. It's touch. It's rhythm. The pacing matters. You need to slow the AI down to reflect how real conversations actually feel. Ray nodded. You're saying we're translating content, but not emotion. Clara nodded. And if you miss the emotion, you miss the point. Jonas, who had once doubted her, jotted something in his notebook and murmured, "She's right." Nathan caught her eye and smiled, not the professional, guarded smile, but something warmer. Clara looked away, unsure what to do with that feeling. That evening, as she packed up to leave, Maya pulled her aside. "I hope you don't take this the wrong way," she said gently, "but you're doing more than consult here." Clara frowned. "What do you mean you're anchoring the work to something real? It's easy to get lost in code. You bring it back to people." Clara's throat tightened. "I don't know if I'm qualified to do that." "You are," Maya said, "even if no one ever told you that before." Outside, the sun had begun to set, spilling copper light across the parking lot. Clara stood still for a moment, letting the wind play with her hair, the day's noise drifting behind her like the end of a song. She didn't know what tomorrow would hold. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, she knew this much. She was no longer waiting to be chosen. She was choosing. The lab was warmer than usual that morning. A storm had rolled through Vermont the night before, and the old factory windows still trembled with leftover thunder. Clara arrived early, her jacket damp from the drizzle, and her hair clinging softly to her cheeks. Nathan was already there, reviewing feedback logs on his tablet. He glanced up as she walked in. "You're early." "So are you." He smiled, couldn't sleep. Clara nodded. She understood that kind of restlessness, the kind that comes when something inside you is moving faster than your circumstances can catch up. An hour later, the team gathered for a cross-functional workshop. They were expecting a new consultant, someone brought in by the board to audit progress and recommend strategy alignment, whatever that meant. Nathan didn't seem thrilled. Jonas looked outright annoyed. Clara took a seat near the edge of the long conference table, her notebook open, fingers lightly tapping a pen. She didn't expect to speak. She rarely did in these bigger meetings. Today, she was content to listen. Then the consultant walked in, and Clara's world jolted. She hadn't seen Dr. Lillian Mercer in nearly 6 years. Not since the final semester Clara never finished. Back then, Dr. Mercer had been the head of the ASL program, stern, brilliant, unyielding. She had once told Clara, after a late project submission, promise is nothing without follow-through. Dr. Mercer's presence in the room felt like cold water on warm skin. She swept in like she belonged, which she did, and greeted Nathan with a firm handshake. Then her eyes landed on Clara. A flicker of recognition, then nothing. No hello. No how have you been. Just a slight tightening of the jaw, a subtle shift of posture. Clara's stomach twisted. The workshop began with Maya presenting updates on cultural nuance mapping. Ray followed with prototype accessibility features. Then it was time for Tina, the deaf beta tester, to demonstrate live feedback on casual communication detection. Everything was going well until Dr. Mercer raised her hand. "This model still leans too heavily on non-native sign interpretations," she said. "Facial grammar is being overemphasized in emotional cues. That can create false positives in conversation modeling. Tina frowned and signed, but those cues are essential. It's how we show tone. Jonas began to respond, but Clara spoke first before she could stop herself. Dr. Mercer, she said, her voice calm but clear. With respect, the facial expressions aren't overemphasized. They're being restored. For too long, we've treated ASL like it's just hands. It's not. Dr. Mercer turned her gaze toward Clara fully now. And you are. Clara felt the room tilt. I was one of your students, she said quietly, before I had to leave school. Dr. Mercer blinked, then nodded slowly. Yes, Clara. Benson. Was it Clara nodded once? I remember now. You left without notice. Never officially withdrew. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice. The air in the room turned still. Tina looked from one woman to the other. Jonas leaned back in his chair. Nathan's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. Clara could feel her pulse in her fingertips. Sometimes, she said softly, life takes you in directions that don't ask your permission. But I kept learning. I kept using what you taught me. And I'm here now, contributing. That should mean something. Dr. Mercer folded her hands on the table. I have no issue with your presence. I only question the methodology. Clara didn't reply, but her hands, resting on the table, curled just slightly, not in anger, in something else. Steadiness. After the meeting, Clara stepped outside into the covered alley beside the building. The storm had passed, leaving behind puddles that mirrored the gray sky. She needed space to breathe. Nathan followed a few minutes later. You okay? Clara shrugged. Didn't expect a pop quiz from my old life. She's sharp, he said carefully. She's dismissive. Nathan nodded. And wrong. That surprised Clara. She's not wrong about everything, Clara said. She built a whole generation of interpreters. But she doesn't believe people like me get second chances. Nathan leaned against the brick wall. And what do you believe? Clara hesitated. I believe people grow, and I believe that I don't need her permission to keep becoming who I am. Nathan smiled gently. That sounds like someone who's ready for something more. She glanced at him. Are you offering something? He didn't answer. Just said, keep showing up like this, and the offer won't be a surprise. That night, Clara sat at the kitchen table while Eli worked on a robotics kit beside her. The smell of rain still lingered through the open window. She signed, Do you remember Dr. Mercer? The professor who scared you more than horror movies. Eli signed with a grin. Clara smiled. She showed up at the lab today. Eli's hands paused mid-wiring. What did she say? That people like me don't follow through? And what did you say? Clara thought for a moment. I said I'm still learning, and that I belong here. Eli's face softened. That's new. What is you saying? You belong anywhere. Clara looked at him for a long moment, then signed. Maybe it's time I started believing it. The next morning, Clara walked through the staff entrance of the Green Hill Inn, just as she had done nearly every day for the past 5 years. But this time, her uniform felt different, heavier. It clung to her not with sweat, but with uncertainty. She passed the lobby, nodding politely to the front desk clerk who barely glanced up. The scent of lemon polish and brewed coffee filled the hallway. Everything was familiar, but Clara felt like she was walking through a place she no longer lived in. The walls hadn't changed, but she had. Maggie Green stood near the back offices, clipboard in hand. Her voice called out before Clara even reached her. You're late. Clara glanced at the clock. She wasn't. Still, she didn't argue. I need you on lobby restrooms today, Maggie said, flipping the clipboard shut. We had a leak overnight. Maintenance cleared it, but you'll need to deep clean everything. Clara nodded. No eye contact. No questions. Just the same script until Maggie paused beside her. You've been distracted lately, Clara straightened. I've done every shift you assigned. Maggie gave a tight smile. Sure, But not everyone notices when the heart's no longer in the work. I do. Clara didn't flinch. My heart's still here, she said quietly. But part of it is somewhere else now, too. Somewhere that's growing. Maggie didn't respond. She didn't need to. The silence said everything. Clara entered the restroom with a mop and gloves, setting to work like always, tile by tile, mirror by mirror, every surface reflecting her own hesitation. She remembered how, in her first year here, she'd take pride in the gleam of the floors. She'd rearranged the soaps to face exactly the same direction. She had treated it as something sacred, a quiet offering of order in a world that rarely gave any back. But today she looked at her reflection and didn't see just a housekeeper. She saw a woman who had advised software engineers, who had taught developers about cultural nuance, who had stood her ground against the professor who once made her feel small, and now she was back here, scrubbing water stains from porcelain. She wasn't ashamed, but she was no longer content. That evening, back at home, Eli was already setting the table when Clara walked in. He looked up, eyes scanning her face. She didn't need to sign anything. He could read it in her posture. Hard day, he asked with his hands. Clara sank into the chair. It felt like I was cleaning someone else's past. He sat beside her. You mean yours? Yes, like I was visiting the version of me I used to be, but I couldn't talk to her anymore. Eli considered that. That's what growth feels like, when the old you becomes a memory instead of a home. Clara stared at the table. I want to leave, she said aloud, quietly, like saying it too loud might make it less real. Then leave, Eli said, his voice matching hers in softness. She looked at him. What if I'm walking into something I can't actually do? What if I'm not enough? Eli reached for her hand, placed his smaller one over it. Then you'll learn, just like you did with me. The next morning, Clara wrote her resignation letter before sunrise. She typed it slowly, thoughtfully. Every word weighed, not for drama, but for truth. To Maggie Green and the management at Green Hill Inn, I am grateful for the years I've spent here. This job allowed me to care for my family, to rebuild, and to survive. But I have come to realize that surviving and living are not the same thing. I've been offered a new opportunity, one that asks me to grow, to give more of myself, and to believe in what I once thought was lost. I hope you'll understand. With respect, Clara Benson. She printed 2 copies, folded them, slipped them into her bag. At the lab, later that day, Clara waited until lunch break before she approached Nathan. He was seated in the corner with Ray, reviewing a new interface for mobile users with limited motor control. When Clara tapped lightly on the table, he looked up. Can I talk to you for a moment? Of course, he said, rising without hesitation. They stepped into the hallway. Clara handed him the letter. He took it, opened it slowly, scanned the first few lines, then looked at her. You're resigning. From the hotel, she said. Not from this. Nathan exhaled, the tension in his shoulders dissolving. I wasn't sure if you'd say yes. Clara smiled. A small one, but steady. I don't know what job title this becomes, or what salary you're offering yet. I don't even know if I'm ready. Nathan folded the letter carefully. But I'm willing, she said, and that's more than I could say a month ago. He nodded. Let's build from there. The first Monday after Clara's resignation felt strange. She woke up at the same time, brewed the same coffee, tied her hair the same way. But when she looked in the mirror, the person looking back wasn't in uniform anymore. She was in her own clothes, simple. Yes, but hers. She didn't carry a cart today. She carried a laptop bag, that day. Clara Benson walked through the doors of Holloway Labs not as a guest, not as a helper. She walked in as part of the team. Nathan had sent her an official title that morning, Human-Centered Communication Consultant. Clara laughed softly when she read it. It sounded fancier than she felt. But maybe titles didn't matter. Maybe showing up, day after day, ready to learn and to teach, was enough. Still, she couldn't help but feel a flutter of nerves as she stepped into the morning meeting. Nathan stood at the head of the room, whiteboard markers already staining his palms. Maya, Ray, Jonas, all present. And so was Dr. Mercer. Clara's breath caught for half a second. Of course she was here. The board had extended her contract as a systems advisor, which meant Clara would need to sit in meetings with the very person who once symbolized her greatest unfinished chapter. She took a seat. Front row, no shrinking. Nathan began the session with a surprise. We've been invited to present Holloway at the Inclusive Futures Tech Summit in Boston next month, he announced. It's a closed-door preview for impact investors and government accessibility officials. Everyone straightened. Jonas muttered, "That's huge." Nathan continued, "They're not just looking for tech. They want stories, real applications. Human results. We'll have 12 minutes on stage." He looked directly at Clara. "And I'd like Clara to lead the presentation." The room went still. Jonas's eyebrows rose. Ray blinked. Maya smiled. Dr. Mercer tilted her head slightly but said nothing. Clara's stomach dropped. She managed. "Why me?" Nathan's tone was calm. "Because you represent the why. You've lived what this software is trying to solve. No one understands the heart of it like you do. I'm not a public speaker. You don't have to perform," Nathan said. "You just have to be real. And that's what this whole thing is about." Clara nodded slowly, heart pounding. The next few weeks became a blur of rehearsals, content drafts, and demo testing. Ray coached her gently on pacing. Maya worked with her on framing the narrative. Nathan offered feedback, always respectful, always encouraging. Each time Clara spoke in front of the team, she felt her nerves shake, but not collapse, like scaffolding holding something new and fragile upright. Her presentation centered on a simple story, her brother Eli, how she learned sign language to speak with him, how they once had to write notes in silence when he lost his hearing until her hands learned to speak for both of them, and how technology could have made those early days less isolating. She would demo the Holloway interface with a video of Eli using it to speak with their mother. The software would detect ASL input and deliver spoken responses in a voice that matched Eli's tone and pace. Not robotic, not generic, just him. That was the promise. Not just translation, connection. But the night before they left for Boston, Clara nearly backed out. She sat in her apartment, laptop open, script glowing white in the dark. Doubt curled in again. What if I mess up? What if I forget the signs? What if I prove everyone wrong for believing in me? She closed the laptop and went to the porch, where Eli was fiddling with an old radio. He noticed the worry on her face right away. She didn't need to explain. He just signed, "They're not asking for a performance. They're asking for your truth. What if my truth isn't impressive enough? Then they'll finally see what real truth looks like." She smiled, a quiet, tired, grateful smile. The next afternoon, standing backstage at the tech summit, Clara wore a black blazer over a soft blue blouse. Her hands were trembling slightly, so she clasped them together. Nathan leaned toward her. "You ready, No?" she said, then smiled. "But I'll do it anyway." He grinned. "That's all any of us ever do." When she stepped onto the stage, the lights were brighter than she imagined. The room was packed. Investors, executives, lawmakers. The type of people who had power to change systems, and the type who rarely looked beyond resumes. But Clara didn't think about them. She thought about a boy who once signed to her in the dark, asking if he would ever hear again. And she began. She signed her introduction as she spoke it, letting her hands lead. "My name is Clara Benson. I was not hired for this job because of my degrees. I don't have one. I was not chosen because of my titles. I didn't have one of those either." A beat of stillness. "I was chosen because I've lived the problem we're trying to solve." She told them about Eli, about the long nights, about how shame and silence often go hand in hand, about the beauty of language that doesn't rely on sound. Then she cued the video. Eli appeared on the screen, smiling at their mother as he signed. The software interpreted and voiced his words warm, full of inflection, human. The room was silent. When the video ended, Clara spoke again. "We built this not just to communicate words. We built it to preserve dignity." She paused, looked around, And dignity begins when we stop asking people to prove their value and start designing systems that recognize it. The applause came slowly at first, then rose, sustained, sincere. Clara stood in the spotlight, hands still at her sides, heart thudding like a drum of something new pride. Not because she had proven anything to the room, but because, for the first time in her life, she had proven something to herself. The moment Clara stepped off stage, the world seemed to blur around her. Voices, clapping, flashes of phones and polite smiles. Nathan reached out to steady her arm, but she barely noticed. It wasn't stage fright. It was something deeper, a quiet thunder in her chest, a feeling she hadn't named in years, worthiness. Real, earned, unshakable. They didn't let her walk 10 feet before someone from the Department of Accessibility approached her with a card. Your story, that's what tech's been missing. We'd love to bring you in for a roundtable this fall. A venture group offered to sponsor further testing with real families. A journalist from The Atlantic asked for a follow-up interview. Even Dr. Mercer, who had remained silent throughout the applause, approached Clara with a single word: impactful. It was the closest to praise Clara had ever heard from her. That night, back in the hotel room, Clara stood barefoot on the balcony. She hadn't changed out of her blazer yet. The fabric still smelled faintly of stage lights and adrenaline. Eli joined her, holding a slice of leftover cheesecake from the summit dinner. He handed it to her with a smirk. You didn't fall off the stage. Clara took the plate. I said the wrong sign twice. Nobody noticed. I noticed. He nudged her shoulder. You changed the room. That's what they'll remember. She smiled, and they both stood in silence, letting the city hum beneath them. Back at the lab 2 days later, the energy had shifted. The inbox overflowed with collaboration requests, offers, partnerships, some commercial, some nonprofit, all asking the same thing. How can we bring this to more people? But amid the excitement, something heavier also surfaced. Jonas approached Clara with a file. This came in anonymously through our website's contact form. He said, "Thought you should see it before it spreads." Clara opened the file. Her stomach turned. It was a scan of her dropped college transcript, incomplete, marked with academic probation from years ago. Alongside it, a grainy photo her in a housekeeping uniform at Green Hill Inn, taken without her knowledge. Below it, a comment. Is this who's designing tech for the deaf? Now no name, no sender, just a shadow in the light. Clara sat at her desk for a long time, the file still open. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. But the room suddenly felt colder. Nathan came by minutes later. I heard. She nodded. I knew this would come eventually. She said, some people don't like it when the story doesn't match the resume. Nathan pulled a chair beside her. They think credentials are the whole truth. She looked at him. Aren't they? He shook his head. Credentials tell you what someone finished. They don't tell you what someone survived. That evening, Clara walked home slowly, rain starting to spit from the clouds. She thought about quitting again, not because she wasn't strong enough, but because she was tired of proving her right to exist in rooms where others entered unquestioned. She found Eli asleep on the couch, a book still open on his chest. She tucked a blanket around him and sat at the kitchen table, fingers hovering over her phone. She opened her social media, then paused. She didn't want to defend herself. She wanted to redefine the story. The next morning, she posted a photo. It was a split image. On the left, her in the faded Green Hill Inn uniform, holding a mop. On the right, her on stage in Boston, hands mid-sign, blazer crisp. The caption read, "Both of these women are me. One cleaned floors to take care of her brother. The other stood before a room of decision-makers and told a story no software could replicate. One is not better than the other. One made the other possible. Some will only ever see what you were. Build anyway, speak anyway, shine anyway, because your value is not defined by their comfort." She turned off her phone, closed the laptop, and exhaled. She didn't post it for applause. She posted it so no one could weaponize her past again. The post went viral within 24 hours. Thousands of shares, tens of thousands of comments. Nurses, janitors, teachers, veterans, deaf and hearing people alike. They didn't just cheer her on. They saw themselves in her. They wrote, "I've been there. You just told my story." This gave me permission. Permission. That was the word Clara had chased for years. Now, she realized she never needed it. She just needed clarity. At the next board meeting, Clara sat beside Nathan as equal not guest, not intern, not silent. She laid out a proposal to expand the beta testing of Holloway across rural schools and community centers. Her logic was airtight, her presence unshakable. When it was time for final comments, Dr. Mercer, still reserved, spoke up. "I opposed this direction at first," she admitted, "but I've come to see that real innovation doesn't always come from those with the loudest voice or longest degree. Sometimes it comes from someone who refused to stay silent." Clara met her gaze and nodded, not in triumph, but in understanding. 6 months later, Clara stood in front of a classroom, not as a guest, not as an observer, but as an instructor. The room wasn't fancy, just a community center in Montpellier with mismatched chairs and a coffee machine that wheezed more than it brewed. But every seat was filled. Some in the audience were deaf, some hearing, some were parents. Others were developers. A few were both, and they were here to learn from her. Clara adjusted her collar and took a breath, then signed and spoke at once. "This isn't about software. It's about story." After Boston, the Holloway Initiative had expanded faster than anyone expected. With funding secured and community partnerships growing, Nathan offered Clara a formal leadership position, Director of Inclusive Experience. She accepted, but not before requesting one condition. "I don't want a corner office. I want classrooms. I want community rooms. I want places that don't have ceilings too high for someone like me to reach." He agreed. And now, here she was, teaching developers how to humanize design, teaching parents how to listen to silence, teaching teenagers who didn't yet know their hands held language. Back at the lab, Maya had built a whole module based on Clara's insights. Ray designed an onboarding system specifically for deaf teens. Jonas, surprisingly, became the most vocal advocate for emotionally intelligent AI. Even Dr. Mercer, now consulting from a distance, sent Clara a note. "I underestimated the value of untraditional paths. Thank you for redefining what excellence can look like." Clara kept the note in a drawer, not for pride, but for proof. Proof that people could change, even the ones who once stood in your way. One chilly November evening, Clara received a message from Maggie Green. It was short, polite, direct. "Eli left something at the front desk. You're welcome to stop by and pick it up." Clara hesitated for days before going back. When she finally did, it was strange how small the Green Hill Inn looked. Not physically, but emotionally. Like a coat she had outgrown. She entered quietly. The staff had mostly changed. A new receptionist handed her a small bag. Inside a bracelet. Eli's. Simple. Worn leather. Probably left behind months ago. Maggie wasn't at the desk. But as Clara turned to leave, a familiar voice called her name. "Clara." She turned. Maggie stood at the hallway corner. Still crisp. Still composed. But her eyes softer. "I saw the news segment," Maggie said. "The one about your work." Clara didn't know how to respond. "You're doing important things," Maggie added, and I wanted to say, "You always did your job well, even when we didn't see what else you were capable of." Clara nodded. "Thank you." It wasn't closure, but it was enough. Later that week, Clara stood outside the school for the deaf, waiting for Eli. He was volunteering with a robotics club now, mentoring younger students. When he came out, smiling, backpack slung over one shoulder, he looked more confident than Clara had ever seen him. "Ready," she signed. "You tell me." He signed back. "You're the busy one now." They walked home together, coats rustling, breath visible in the cold. At one point, Eli stopped walking and turned to her. "You remember when I lost my hearing?" Clara nodded. "You told me I wouldn't be alone, because you wouldn't." Eli smiled. "You kept that promise." She reached over, squeezed his hand. "I kept it because you were the reason I started listening in the first place." That night, Clara sat at her kitchen table with a blank notebook. She began writing, not a to-do list, not a work draft, a letter to herself, to the version of her that once believed life ended when the world closed a door. Dear Clara, they thought you were invisible, disposable, replaceable, but you were growing in silence. You were gathering stories, not degrees. You were learning to speak without speaking, to lead without needing a title. Now they see you, but more importantly, now you see yourself, and that is the beginning of everything. 1 month later. The Holloway system launched publicly. The press called it a human revolution in communication tech. But Clara didn't care about headlines. She cared about the grandmother in Ohio who used it to sign bedtime stories to her hearing grandson. She cared about the school in New Mexico that integrated the system into their bilingual curriculum. She cared about the little girl in Kansas who saw Clara on YouTube and signed, "She looks like me." And on one particularly beautiful spring morning, Clara received a letter in return. It was from a young woman, 23, recently out of work, no degree, cleaning offices by night, but learning to sign because her younger brother had just gone deaf. She wrote, "I didn't think I belonged anywhere important until I saw your story. Now, I think maybe I do." Clara closed the letter. She looked out the window at a world that once felt so far above her and smiled, because maybe the ceiling was never real. Maybe it was just waiting for someone brave enough to reach up and tear it down. In a world that often measures worth by titles, degrees, or job descriptions, Clara Benson's journey reminds us of something far more enduring, the quiet strength of a life lived with care, humility, and heart. She wasn't handed opportunity. She carved it slowly, silently through years of unseen labor and unwavering love for her brother. When the world looked past her, she didn't shout. She listened. She learned. And when the moment came, she was ready not with credentials, but with compassion, lived experience, and the courage to say, "I belong." Her story asks us gently, what dreams have we set aside, thinking we were too late, too old, not enough? It's never too late to grow, to be seen, to rewrite how the world sees us. Sometimes, the most powerful change begins not with a loud voice, but with a steady hand reaching forward to help, to sign, to speak again after years of silence. So wherever you are in life, retired, rebuilding, or just remembering, know this: your story still matters, and you still have chapters left to write. Let Clara's courage be your reminder. You don't need permission to begin again. Thank you for taking the time to walk alongside Clara's journey. If this story moved you, made you reflect, or simply warmed your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more meaningful stories to life. Let's continue spreading hope, healing, and human connection, one story at a time.